So I saw a question the other day. It was actually a whole group of women who were talking about constantly juggling their household, like motherhood, military spouse responsibilities, all the things. And that leaves them most of the time feeling like they don't have time for themselves and their business.
Yeah.
And so, of course, that got me thinking, like, what more is there, right? There, it's always for me, it always goes like, what is going on there? Why are you feeling that way? I know why they're feeling that way because I came from that place too, but it's a lot. And so I started thinking, like, how can I respond and condense this for them? And the very first thing that came to mind was, we've talked about this a zillion times, but I think I want to maybe give it a little bit of a twist here, and it's their identity, right? So if
Mm.
you're constantly showing up for your children, of course you are, we all are. We wouldn't, you don't have kids if you're not going to show up for them, right? That's what moms do.
Right.
And yet, mom is not the only thing that you are,
Hmm.
right? Of course, we're always going to make sure that our kids are cared for first. That doesn't mean only. That doesn't mean we're only caring for them, right?
Right.
And then, showing up for your service member. Or, even if there's women listening to this who your spouse isn't a service member, but, they're the ones that go out and do the 9 to 5 thing, right? So, but I'll bring it back to service member because that's, who I mostly deal with. You have this, you're the military spouse. And that is another piece of your identity that you've taken, and you're associating yourself with that as who you are, right? I am a mother. I am a military spouse. And if these are the focus of who you believe you are, of course, they're getting the majority of your time and your energy. And so a lot of this does go back to, it's not even, we've talked about like losing your identity, right? And I think that's a great phrase because it does feel like we've lost ourselves. This is a thing
Mhm.
I've said, it's a thing you've said, it's a thing all over the place that I've heard women say, I've lost myself, I've lost my identity, right? I don't have an identity of my own anymore. And I think I'm not going to argue the statement because I actually like the statement, but it's not specifically that we have lost our identity. You haven't lost who you are. It's just buried, right? Under
Mm.
all the other things that you've taken on. So, and
Yeah.
then, and it's, who you are and what you do has been added to over the years. So who was at the core of all that stuff before those other responsibilities got piled on? She's still there. She's just
Yeah.
real quiet because she's buried under a whole bunch of other stuff. She's screaming to you, like, pay attention to me, listen to me. Hey, I'm here. I've got something, I've got a need, right? But you can barely hear her because she's under all of the other noise from all the other things going on in your life that you've taken responsibility for. So if you look at it from a perspective of identity, it's maybe redefining or reconsidering what your identity is. Are you a mom? Yes, of course you are. Are you a military spouse? Well, yeah, you are. Is that where your identity stops? No. You've got to make space for that other part of you that belongs to you, that speaks to what your purpose and passion is. If you don't make space for that part of you, then
Yeah.
yeah, it's going to feel like you don't have time for you and you don't have time for your business. You've got to figure out a way to make what you want matter. And I realize like that is easier said than done. That's for
Hmm.
the purposes here. That's the advice, right? But that's going to require work, and that's okay. You've got to give yourself permission to claim that so that you can do that work. Because until you give yourself permission to have that, your brain is gonna find all the reasons in the world for you not to. You've got too many responsibilities to your children and their activities and their, getting them together with their friends and whatever. You've got way too many responsibilities to your service member and they're deploying and they're going to the field and they're doing this and they're doing that. You couldn't possibly fit yourself in there, right? Your brain is going to live in that space until you give it a new focus. And that starts with giving yourself permission, letting yourself live in the space of, I am worthy of this thing that I want, and I'm worthy of having it now.
Yeah.
So,
I think that for me, when I felt like I had lost my identity, I didn't even realize it, right? Like it was in
oh,
hindsight
yeah, it
that,
happens so gradually, day by
yeah,
day. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was in hindsight. So it wasn't something that I could connect with right away and say,
Mhm.
"Oh, I don't feel like myself."
Yeah.
So, I think that in hindsight, though, I'm like, "Wow, I really lost who I was," because like you said, I was so buried with this new life, these new expectations, this new, thing that it wasn't until I started making time for myself,
Mhm.
and that's when things started to become, unburied, I guess you could say,
Yeah.
right? Like, I became aware, only then, only when I started to do the things for myself.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
the first thing, right? So you have to have the awareness that it's even going on, because like you said, it's not a thing that just suddenly happens. It happens over time, and then suddenly one not suddenly, but one day we become aware because we're just there's this feeling like something's missing, something's out of whack, something's not right, or there's this yearning like, man, I wish I had what she has, or I
Right.
used to have that, I miss that, right? So somehow this it comes into our awareness that there's something missing or not quite in alignment. Um, and then when you've got that awareness, that's where you can start to make the changes. You get to start claiming what you want. Um, I've mentioned this before. I wrote a book a couple years ago, and it's called More Than Mom, from
Mhm.
stay-at-home mom to entrepreneur. And I wrote it for moms who were doing what I was doing at the time when I wrote the book, or just before I wrote the
Yeah.
book, staying at home, but they wanted something more for themselves. And so I wrote
Yeah.
this book from the mindset perspective. There's a little bit of strategy here, but it's very much the mindset of how do you become an entrepreneur when what you've been is a stay-at-home mom. And one of the things that I suggest, and only ever, if this suits you, right? Always, if it doesn't suit you, you toss it. But for
Right.
me, one of the things was I was a stay-at-home mom for, I don't know, 7, 8 years before I pursued anything entrepreneurial.
Mm.
That was what I did. I stayed at home with my kids and I supported my service member. I didn't have another thing outside of that I was pursuing. And so when I started to want to build my business, and this was on my Etsy shop at the time, it it was it remained like a hobby, because even though I was saying I want it to be a business, I want it to be something special, I want it to make my family money, I want it to be like a big thing, right? I wasn't living it. It was just
Mhm.
lip service. I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know that I had to change a lot more than just the things I was saying. And so I finally became aware like my identity is a stay-at-home mom.
Yeah.
And I've said this a zillion times before, there's nothing wrong with that if that's what you want, right? But if it's
Mhm.
not what you want and it's still how you're identifying, there's a block there, there's a barrier.
Yeah.
Something's just a little bit off. You've got to shift that. And so what I started saying and what I suggested in my book was stop saying I'm a stay-at-home mom. And I did. I stopped saying, when people were like, what do you do? I stopped saying, oh, I'm a stay-at-home mom and I have a little Etsy shop. I was
Mhm.
diminishing the thing that I
Right.
was trying to build.
Passionate about, right.
Yes. Um, and so I started saying, at the time it was, I'm an Etsy shop owner. Like it was
Mhm.
baby steps for me. I needed to say that I was a business owner. I was just so shy about claiming it and owning it.
Right.
And this was before I got the coaching, right? But
Mhm.
fast forward to getting coaching and having the confidence to claim what I want, and giving myself permission, having somebody else give me permission so that I could give myself permission, all those steps in between that, lead to where I am today. Um, it was, I finally got to the point where people are like, what do you do? I'm like, I'm a small business owner. That's not specifically what I say, but that's the essence of it, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, staying in, like continuing to perpetuate the identities that we have taken on without also finding space for who we truly want to shine through as, is what's
Mhm.
keeping folks where they are. It's what's keeping women from making the time for themselves and to build their businesses. You've got to claim that part too. When you claim it
Yeah.
and you own it and you embrace it and you allow it for yourself, you'll start to see the shifts.
I think that's, a very good tip. to give, because I was going to say that maybe they felt like that. For me, the only thing that made me realize that I had lost a little bit of myself was, I had lived in California for 15 years. And when I came back to Ohio, my family was saying, "You're so different. You're not the same. You're not." And I thought, oh, well, yeah, like I've grown. I am a better person. And really, I had grown and I was a better person, but also in that growth, I had lost so much of my personality in order to accommodate
Mhm.
other people. And so it was only when I started my business and really diving into my business and really um, feeling so dedicated to it that, like you said, I became this different person because I was claiming it, because I was so, um, what's the word, determined to become that new version of myself.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I kind of claimed it that I started to become it.
Mhm.
And I think that that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
I love that. I love it.
I'm bad.